I never should have gone back to Black Hollow. The dark pine forest stretched endlessly, its twisted branches clawing at the sky. The locals always spoke of the woods in hushed whispers, warning outsiders like me to stay away once the sun dipped below the horizon. But curiosity is a cruel master, and I couldn't resist the call of the unknown. My name is Daniel Hayes, and I was once a journalist for an obscure paranormal magazine. I traveled across the country, digging into urban legends and supernatural myths, always hoping to find something real, something undeniable. Black Hollow had been on my radar for years, a hotbed of cryptid sightings and unexplained disappearances. And now, after months of research, I had finally made my way to this forsaken place. The town itself was little more than a collection of ramshackle houses and a single gas station. The air was thick with an unshakable sense of dread, as if the very ground carried the weight of a terrible secret. The people here were tight-lipped, their eyes darting away whenever I pressed for information. Only old Elijah Warren, the town's reclusive historian, was willing to speak with me. "You don't belong here, boy," he rasped, his voice raw from years of smoking. "Something's out there in those woods. It ain't no bear, neither." "Then what is it?" I asked, leaning forward in my chair. He hesitated, fingers tightening around his whiskey glass. "Some call it the Wendigo. Others say it's the Dogman. Ain't got no real name for it, 'cause most who see it don't come back. All I know is, once you hear the howls, you best pray they ain't meant for you." That should have been enough to turn me away. But it wasn't. Armed with my camera, a flashlight, and a notepad, I set out into the forest that night. The air was cold, unnaturally so, and the silence was oppressive. No crickets, no owls, just the crunch of dead leaves beneath my boots. I followed the path deeper into the woods, my flashlight beam barely penetrating the suffocating darkness. Then I heard it. A low, guttural growl, impossibly deep and resonant. My breath hitched as I swung my flashlight toward the sound, but all I could see were the endless trees, shifting shadows playing tricks on my mind. "It's just a coyote," I muttered to myself. "Just a branch snapped behind me. Spinning around, I caught a glimpse of something in the periphery of my vision, a hulking silhouette, far too large to be any normal animal. My pulse pounded as I tried to rationalize what I was seeing. A trick of the light. A bear standing on its hind legs. Then it moved. The figure stepped forward, revealing itself in the pale glow of my flashlight. It was tall, easily 7 feet, and covered in matted fur. Its elongated snout curled into something that almost resembled a sneer. And its eyes, God, its eyes, they burned with an unnatural, hungry light. The Dogman. Terror paralyzed me. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs refused to obey. The creature took another step, its clawed fingers flexing as if savoring the moment. I fumbled for my camera, snapping a single, shaky photo before the thing let out a bone-chilling howl. Something else answered. A different howl, higher-pitched yet equally blood-curdling, echoed through the trees. My gut twisted as I realized the horrifying truth. I wasn't dealing with just one of these things. There were more. I turned and ran. Branches slashed at my face, roots threatened to trip me with every step, but I didn't dare slow down. Behind me, the heavy thud of footsteps kept pace, closing in. My lungs burned, my heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept running, driven by pure survival instinct. Then I saw it, an old hunting cabin, barely visible through the dense trees. Praying it wasn't abandoned, I pushed myself harder, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I reached the door and slammed into it, twisting the rusted handle. It wouldn't budge. A deep snarl came from behind me. I spun around just as the creature lunged. I threw myself to the side, crashing into the dirt as its claws raked through empty air. Scrambling to my feet, I slammed my shoulder against the door once, twice. It gave way. I tumbled inside, kicking the door shut behind me. My hands fumbled for the lock, twisting it just as the beast threw itself against the wood. The entire cabin shook with the impact. My chest heaved as I backed away, my flashlight flickering. The scratching started soon after, slow, deliberate, as if the thing outside was toying with me. I clenched my fists, my mind racing for a way out. The cabin was small, one room, a rusted wood stove in the corner, a single window covered in grime, no gun, no phone, no means of escape. Then the whispering began. It wasn't English. It wasn't anything I had ever heard before. A guttural, rasping murmur that slithered through the cracks in the walls. My skin crawled as the temperature plummeted, frost forming along the edges of the window. I knew then that I was never supposed to leave these woods. The scratching stopped. Silence swallowed the cabin. I held my breath, waiting, listening. Then, from behind me, a voice. "You shouldn't have come here." I whirled around. The last thing I saw were those burning eyes in the darkness. And then, nothing. A void, blacker than the night itself, swallowed me whole. When I woke, I was no longer in the cabin. I was in the woods, lying in a bed of dead leaves. My body ached, my mind a foggy mess. The only proof of the horrors I had faced was the deep claw marks on my arm and the camera, lying next to me, its single picture capturing a blur of glowing eyes in the darkness. I staggered to my feet, my every muscle screaming in protest. The sun was rising, but I knew I was still far from safety. My car was miles away, back in town, and I had no choice but to stay another night before I could leave this cursed place. A rustling in the underbrush sent my heart racing. My instincts screamed for me to move, but my body was frozen. Slowly, I turned my head. The woods were watching me. I wasn't alone, and the sun would set again soon. Somewhere in the distance, the howls began anew, and so did the hunt. I had to find shelter. I had to find a way to survive the next night. The town was too far, and the creatures were closing in. My only hope was an old fire tower. I remembered from my research a relic from a time when men still tried to tame this wilderness. If I could make it there before nightfall, I might just have a chance. I ran. The shadows lengthened, and the howls grew closer. The trees blurred as I sprinted through the brush, ignoring the sharp branches clawing at my skin. My breath came in ragged gasps. I couldn't stop. Not now. Not when they were right behind me. Then I saw it, the tower, a skeletal structure looming in the gloom. It was my only chance. I pushed forward, praying I would reach it in time. I stumbled through the underbrush and burst into the clearing, relief nearly collapsing me as I spotted the fire tower. The old wooden structure creaked in the wind, a defiant testament to human resilience standing against the vast wilderness. My heart raced, and a surge of adrenaline propelled me forward. The first rungs of the ladder looked as ancient as the tower itself, worn and splintered. I could hear them rending claws and guttural growls closing in on my position. I climbed with desperation, each rung feeling like a tiny victory against the encroaching darkness below. I reached the trapdoor at the top and kicked it open with all my strength, tumbling into the small observation room above. The view was breathtaking, but I couldn't afford to admire it. I barricaded the door with a nearby old wooden bench, just as the howls crescendoed into a cacophony of chaos, rattling the very walls of the tower. I had to steady my breath as I leaned against the dirt-streaked windows, flashlight in hand, heart hammering in my chest. Peering down through the slats, I could see shadowy figures circling the base of the tower. Their eyes gleamed like shards of glass in the fading light, unearthly, hungry. Hours seemed to pass as I huddled in the small space, praying the tower would hold against the onslaught. The sun dipped below the horizon, stealing with it the last vestiges of hope. The howls rose in a rhythmic symphony, an eerie chorus that filled my ears and thrust me deeper into despair. In the flickering beam of my flashlight, I noticed something shimmering just outside the dusty window, an ancient map pinned to the wall. It was a faded artifact of the forest's history, showing the areas where people had gone missing. Heart racing again, I traced my finger over the lines. One led directly to a small clearing not far from the tower, marked with an ominous symbol. The whispering returned then, a low and haunted chant that sent chills down my spine. It was a language lost to time, punctuated by the haunting howls below. As the shadows blurred the edges of my senses, I felt the pull of whatever dwelled in those dark woods like a dark tide drawing me into its depths. Suddenly, I heard scratching on the steel external steps of the tower as the first of the creatures began to ascend. Pounding my heart quelled beneath the roar of survival. I quickly switched off the flashlight, plunging myself into darkness, a darkness that seemed to pulse with shadows of dread. The scrabbling grew louder, breaths coming closer, tainting the air with the scent of blood and decay. I had to act fast. I rummaged through the small space, desperate for anything that could help me. An old fire extinguisher caught my eye and, seizing it, I readied myself. With a quick glance down, I saw a hulking silhouette already surging toward the landing. A flash of hair and claws darted into view. I couldn't see its eyes, but I could hear its breath, a low growl, instinctive and primal. The door heaved against something's weight as I pressed my back against the wall. Just as the door splintered open, I whipped around and blasted the fire extinguisher at the advancing shadow. The bright cloud of white powder filled the room, disorienting the creature and obscuring the suffocating darkness. I could hear the creature howl in frustration, its claws scratching wildly at the landing. My chance arrived as the dogman momentarily faltered. I shoved past the door, plunging into the chaos below. I barreled down the steps and dashed into the forest, white powder swirling behind me, muffling the scent of fear that hung in the air. My instincts kicked back in. All I had to do was run. The tower had given me a few vital seconds, but they were right behind me. The shadows lurked just at the periphery, emboldened by the click of my hurried footsteps. They howled in indignation, an echo of rage that reverberated through the trees. I felt their breath on my heels, primal and hungry, but I refused to look back. As I tore through the underbrush, I recalled the map's marking, that mysterious clearing that potentially held the answer to my survival, a place where something old might reside. With renewed focus, I lost myself in the search for that flicker of hope. Though I was lost, the whispers guided me, weaving through the branches like spectral fingers beckoning me to solace. It wasn't long before the trees thinned, and I burst through into the clearing. A circle of stones surrounded an ancient altar, covered in moss and vines, a strange symbol etched into the surface, a sigil imbued with age-old power. My heart sank as I understood. This was a site of ancient rituals, a remnant of a time when the forest spoke of things more terrible than I had ever imagined. But the moment I stepped into that clearing, I could feel the shift in the air. The howls faded, and for the first time, the dense atmosphere lifted just a bit. I had found a sanctuary of sorts, a place bound to the land by ancient magic. Then I heard it, a soft rustling, followed by the crack of twigs. My instinct screamed to manipulate the stones in some way, perhaps to summon aid from whatever lingered here. I knelt, tracing my fingers over the worn surface, chants slipping unbidden from my lips, unearthed from the depths of my memory like a distant echo. The clearing pulsed, and suddenly, the air hummed with energy. The shadows at the edge seemed to hesitate, as if held at bay by something ancient, something forgotten. A low growl rumbled from the trees. My heart lurched. They had returned. I rose to my feet, ready to face whatever came next, feeling an ancient tether strengthen within me. And as I faced the gathering darkness, I understood I might not leave this place unscathed, but I was no longer a helpless outsider. I had become part of this forest's legacy. The howls swelled again, but this time I stood firm, grounded by a certainty that resonated deep within. I would not yield, I would not be made prey. With the last remnants of daylight flickering like a dying ember, I took my position in that sacred space, ready to challenge whatever came next. Tonight, the forest would witness a different kind of hunt.